You are listening to a message from InRoads Church. We are sorry that the audio is going to be a little bit light at the beginning. It will clean itself up in just a minute. Thanks.
Where we're at, folks, we are in chapters, really 15 and 16 halfway through. And the reason why is we're going to stop. And if many of you guys don't know this, the Bible was not written with chapters, and the guys who put the chapters in always didn't put them in the best spots, all right? So the breaks kind of come sometimes awkwardly. So I'm trying to actually give us complete thoughts. But we are going to cover all of chapter 15 and part of 16 today. And I just wanted to have you guys see some things. And I think it is really interesting, some of the stuff we're going to look at and where it comes from. So here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a release. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it of his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Now, one of the things I want you to understand is that this whole message today, both chapters, have really honestly a really deeper even deal we did last week. Last week was difficult because we were dealing with, man, if your brother leads you down a different path, you're to take him out. But this week has to do with ourselves and our own struggles. One of the things that happened with God is that he knew something about them coming into the promised land. It is very easy to make systems of high, low, meaning those are in the upper echelon, those are in the lower echelon, right? So we get that concept very much. We have the wealthy and we have the poor. This whole plan was meant to break that every 7 years. Every 7 years. So let's say in year 3, I had lended to Ron, and Ron and I have this deal, and he's been paying it back, but we get to the 7th year, and let's say 25% is still left out. I release him of that. And the reason is because, honestly, let's all talk about it. Let's just talk about the elephant in the room. This is how we get into credit card debt, do we not? Honestly, credit card debt. And by the way, there is no 7-year release with Visa, right? But the idea is once you get into that cycle, you never get out of the cycle. And so this was really meant to be, hey, I have this way that you release your brother. Everything goes back every 7 years. And it had to do this idea of, listen, what you have is because I gave it to you, right? What you have is because I gave it to you. And if you sit here and go, well, I'm the master and you're my slave and I'm above you and you're below me, God's going, no. You are then a skew of how it is. The fact is that if you were given a blessing, it's because I gave it to you. Now, you can say there are people who are really good business people and people who work really hard and do those kind of things. And by the way, they will always achieve. But there's a way to have a caste system, and this was meant to break it. Look at the next thing. Of a foreigner, you may exact it, but whatever is within your, but whatever of yours is with your brother, your hand shall release. So again, if there was a foreigner, you could keep that going on. But if it was your brother, no, you have to have a release. Now watch this. But there will be no poor among you, for the Lord will bless you in the land of the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess. Now look what it says. For there will be no poor among you. That's a great thing to shoot for. But I'm going to tell you the whole key is the next word. If. There will be no poor among you if only you will strictly obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all this commandment that I command you today. Meaning, look, you have a way. God has a system, and if you will keep it, there will be no poor among you. What's the problem? The if. Because what happens with us? We are the problem. Because 7 years comes up and like, and so what happens is God goes, listen, I have a plan. Have you ever felt like that God has a plan for you? If you would just follow him and do what he has to do, but what do? We jump in. We take our own direction. We do our own thing, and then we mess things up, and then God has the ability to bring it back to where he wants it to be. But honestly, that if is powerful. Watch what happens next. Well, let me say something to you. I don't want to lead this too quick. It's too good stuff. Here's what's interesting. This if becomes important because God knows something. I have blessings if you trust me. But the problem is we don't trust him. I had an uncle that would do this to every 5, 6-year-old. And you probably had this done to you. He'd go to this 5 or 6-year-old and he goes, here's the deal. I will give you $1 right now, or I will give you a penny doubled every day for the rest of your life. What do you want? And what would the kid take? $1. Do you know what a penny doubled every day for the rest of your life turns out to be? Millions of dollars. Millions. 1 to 2 to, I mean, and it's like within really honestly weeks before you're into the thousands. And it just goes up and up and up and up. But what happens is we see the dollar and we go, dollar. Because a 5-year-old doesn't understand time and all that's going on. No kid ever said, I'll take the penny, right? But that's really kind of what God is doing. God goes, no, I have blessings for you if you will do. I can be exponentially blessing to you, and I have all these ways. And then what do? We take the dollar. We take the dollar. And we miss that God goes, you think by releasing your brother, you're going to be hurt. You don't understand by releasing your brother, I'm going to bless you more. Watch what happens. For the Lord your God will bless you as he promised you, and you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. You shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. Because what happens is that in that you're making a judgment of, and please understand there is a thread of this, better than. Better than. And the problem that we have is, yes, you can say, I'm a better worker, or this person isn't doing this. But what happens is, Jesus says this, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This is a precursor to this concept of the fact of, folks, as much as you think you have, and as much as you think you're better than whoever, you are still not where you need to be. And this is a heart-mind refocus. This whole 2 chapters to say, the moment that you say to yourself, no, I'm going to let my poor brother be poor, what you're saying to that is, I'm better than, and God goes, then you're not going to see the blessings I have for you. By the way, there's even other verses that talks about those who accumulate on this earth, they get all of their blessings here. They get all of their blessings here, but they don't get the blessings that flow out of it. But look at this. Verse 8, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need. Not his want, his need, whatever it may be. And he's trying to say, you think that by you controlling what you do with your brother, but you don't understand, it is this. And so I have this statement, and I've said this statement many times. One of the things that we do when we get to working with the poor is that what we do is we do this exercise, and you've done this. I know you have. Someone comes up to you and you go, oh, if I give them money, they're going to take this money and they're going to go into a bar and they're going to drink this money down. Therefore, I am going to save them from going to the bar by not giving them this money. Right? I'm going to do the righteous thing by not giving them this money. Here's what's interesting what Jesus says. Give someone the cloak, and if they ask for your shirt, your tunic, give them that as well. See, the concept that God wants you to understand is when I ask you to give, that's the moment. You give. What happens after it leaves your hands is between that person and God. You've done your part, and God has already given you the blessing. That's the thing that we need to struggle with and understand, is that God goes, I'm not asking you to wonder what happens with your brother. I'm not asking you to figure out the other side. I'm asking you to say, if a need rises up, do you sit there, give up that need, and go, God, I've done my part. And I know that we want to say, yeah, but this. Now, by the way, do I believe that people will abuse the situation? Absolutely. We had a beautiful day of giving out over almost 700 turkeys this last Thursday. Were there those who I'm going, they're probably beating the system? Yes, they were. But guess what? That's on them. It's not on me. And the blessing, it wasn't like, oh, that bag of groceries that went to them is all of a sudden now null and void. Because the blessing of the person who gave that bag, God's already seen that and rewarded that. Not what the end result is. And that's the game we play. Because, by the way, it gets harder. Watch this. I love this part. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart. Watch the phraseology. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near. So we're in 6th year, 3rd month. If I lend to this guy, at the end of this, he gets off scot-free. Now, do you understand the problem? The person's going, oh, I'm going to lend this, and this guy only has like 6 months to pay back. And then God says, I have to release. Read it again. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the 7th year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry out to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. In that moment, what you're doing is you're missing the blessing of God by going, oh, he's just going to take the release and run. God goes, yes, I just care whether or not you would give to your brother, not what the end result would be. Watch what happens. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give it to him, because for this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and all that you undertake. Notice, giving to your brother in the 6th year, in the 6th month, without grudging, going, I'm just going to give it to them. God goes, whatever you've given them, I can bless you beyond that. And that goes back to our penny versus a dollar. We think by holding back and not giving to that brother because he's going to have this time to go, God goes, no, you're missing it. If you would give him that dollar, I'll give you the blessing of a penny doubled. And we miss it. And I think what happens is that we play these games and we get ourselves and we go, yeah, but I worked hard for my money and I worked and I did the right things. Why should they get it? And it goes back to, no. You are allowed to work hard. You were given the ability to have that job. God put you in a place to be able to have that. It's not about you. And this is a recalibration of actually how we function as human beings. How can the church be different than the rest of the world if we play by these rules? What does it say? Acts, in the beginning of Acts, they came together and no one had what? Need. No one had need. Why? People sold things, gave things, and they gave to each other, and no one lacked anything. Why? Because it was a recalibration. This isn't about us. Is my God big enough? I said it to you a couple weeks ago. Does God need your money? But I will tell you this. God needs you to understand that if you don't give, and you make judgment calls as to their need or not lack of need, we have issues. And I'm wondering how many blessings, not you, that's your problem. I'm wondering how many blessings me, Jeff, have missed because I played a game going, well, they don't deserve it. Because I do? Because I do. Well, you worked hard, Jeff. You did. What? See, it's this game. It is a recalibration of who we are to be thinking, what would happen if we understood that God has this treasure? There was a cartoon that I saw in a newspaper, and there was a guy who was digging a mine. You probably all saw this. He was digging and digging and digging, and he got within a quarter of an inch. If he would have dug one more time, he would hit the gold vein, right? Next scene, he turns around and walks away, right? He's dug. And how many times have you ever been there like, just one more, it could have been the moment? And God's going, no. The problem is, what's the problem with that cartoon? It was about that guy's effort. The problem with that cartoon is that guy's effort. He would just put one more bit of effort, he would hit the gold vein. The concept is this. God goes, no, the gold vein is there if you'll just allow me to have access to what you do. And I've watched so many people who have come to me and said, we started tithing, we started giving, we started doing, and our bills are paid. We're blown away. We start off with less money in the bank and we end up with more at the end. How does that work? It's called God math. I don't know. Because there's not a calculator that works it out well. But I will tell you that we have a God that goes, don't think I don't have. Jody and I we had a talk last night. Our house has not sold, and so yesterday was kind of our like, okay, God, come to Jesus Day, like we got to make a call here. And of course, as we're talking, bleep, there's someone who's going to look at the house today at 1 o'clock. Could that be the person? Maybe. I'm praying. Love for it to be. But Jody and I are at this place of like, now we're starting to do we were level, and we're going to start doing the negative part, right? And I just told Jody, I'm so sorry you're married to me. And she goes, and she knew exactly what I was talking about. She goes, because it's always with us, the 11th inning, that's when it happens for us. I'm like, you need to be married to somebody. And by the way, you young girls, find out the guy if God answers in the first few innings. Marry that guy. Because it is not true for me. And Cody's just like, we've been there too many times. And yet God is blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed and blessed. But I think sometimes he goes, do you trust? And we're like, yes. And we're going to the 11th inning, aren't we? Yes. Here we go. All right. Look at this. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Oh, wait a minute. He doesn't. Yeah. Remember, there will be no poor in the land if. But why will there always be poor in the land? Because of us. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor in your land. Folks, I think we think we're giving away what is so essential when God goes, you don't even understand, that's just a percentage of what I could bless you. And it's perspective. 12, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. So what happened was, if I had to hire a servant, right, I got to pay them a servant's wages. But if I had someone who sold themselves to me to be my slave, I didn't have to pay them because they were a part of my household. I had to take care of them. Does that make sense? But I didn't have to pay them. They were a part of my household, and they were kind of a part of the family grouping. And so what it's saying is, look, and if you've had someone who said, I will sell myself to you to pay off my debt at the end of 6 years, you are to set them free. And when you let them go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. Okay? So it's not like you turn him loose and go, there you go. No, you turn him loose. You say, look, and look what he says. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, out of your winepress, as the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. What's interesting is if you had someone who was a slave, the goal was you would give them enough that they could go start their homestead and become their own person who could handle their own finances. So you gave them enough to actually begin a new life where, by the way, they would never have to be a slave again. Now, why? Because for 6 years, that person, being a part of your family, has blessed you and given you more than you can imagine. Right? Think about that. That person has blessed you. By giving them a percentage of what they've brought to you, you're establishing them in a place where they then can have the freedom to be established. Can you imagine if we put this kind of system into place in America? Because the concept is, for a lot of people, they just can't get over that hill to have their own land, to be able to do the things they need to do. And here's the thing you need to understand. Again, over and over again, if you look in the beginning of Deuteronomy multiple times, I'm giving you cities you did not build, animals you did not have, fields you did not plow, and you're going to turn around and act like you're all that. Right? They walked into pre-set up stuff. And he goes, if that's the case, and someone sells himself to your family, then you turn around and go, no, when I leave, I didn't have this when I got here, you will have a blessing too. Can you imagine the blessing of what would happen if we would take care of people that way? Verse 15. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you to do this. Folks, I took care of you. I took you out of slavery. So, by the way, if you have a slave, that was you. And who redeemed you? Not you, me. So if you have the chance, you redeem your brother. You give them the ability to have. But if he says to you, I will not go out from you because he loves you and your household, since he is well off with you. And there were those who said, you know what? Honestly, it's better for me to stay a slave. You have so well taken care of me, I'm not going to do better on my own. Right? I'm not going to do better on my own. Look what it says. Then you shall take an awl and put it through his ear into the door. Now, what an awl is basically a glorified ice pick. And so what you do is you take them to the door, and you go and you put that all through the ear, and that marks them as they are a part of this household. Then you shall take an awl and put it through his ear into the door, and you shall be your slave forever, and your female slave you shall do the same. It shall not seem hard to you when you let him go. By the way, if you are going to let him go, you shall not seem hard to him when you let him go free from you, for at half the cost of a hired worker, he has served you 6 years. So the Lord God will bless you in all that you do. So in this, How do you not only be where you bless and you give and you say, we want to take care of you and we want to make sure you're loved? Folks, can I tell you, there are masters that people just want to, I'm going to stay here. This is the best place. There's truth here and love here. How do we be those kind of people where people go, no, if I have a choice, I'm staying here? Now, this whole part that we just looked at, chapter 15, deals with this whole issue of us understanding the poor and us understanding how we deal with it. And I'm going to say it to you one last time. Hear me on this. You think that it's about you. It is always about him. Always do what would glorify his name. And I promise you, he will bless you. Promise you, he will bless you. Even at the moment you're going, I'm in the 6th year, 6th month. Bless. Because whatever you think you're losing, God goes, don't you know I could give that back to you 4 times, 5 times, 10 times over? Chapter 16. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. This, by the way, would be March to April. What are we talking about? Passover. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock of the herd at the place that the Lord will choose to make his name dwell there. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to talk about 3, honestly, these pilgrimages they would take. Now, I think this is why this is fun. If there's anything that we have close to pilgrimages, it's Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Now, many of us chose to stay home, whoop, whoop, right? Or we chose somebody to come to us. Or maybe you're like, I'll give up Thanksgiving, but I'm going to pilgrimage at Christmas, right? Or whatever vice. But there's this attitude of, what does it mean to come celebrate? Because this is what all of these are about. They're celebrations. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock of the herd at the place that the Lord will choose to make his name dwell there. So, you're going to begin this process with a Passover lamb. Look what happens. You shall not eat leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that all the days of your life may be remembered the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. So he goes, look, you're going to come in, you're going to celebrate. Now, what did Jesus do to the Passover? Jesus reclaimed the Passover. He took the bread, he said, this bread that you have, I'm going to break it because this is my body. This drink that you have, I'm going to say this wine is now becomes my blood. He reclaimed Passover because who was the Passover lamb? Jesus. By his blood, we are set free. He is the Passover lamb by all of those. So please understand, Jesus reclaims this. Watch what happens. For 6 days you shall eat the unleavened bread, and out of the 7th day there shall be a solemn assembly to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work on it. So they're going to come together and they're going to have this moment to recognize what took place. We're going to have this time. So here's this first one. It begins March to April, right in that time period. You shall count 7 weeks, beginning to count the 7 weeks from the time the sickle is first put to the standing grain. So what would happen is this. You have first this time called Passover. The next one is going to be called the Feast of Weeks because you counted these 7 weeks. So even though it's only a day or 2-day festival, it was called the Day of Weeks. Families mainly went to Passover, and families mainly went to the Feast of Booths. Mainly the men went up to this one called the Feast of Weeks. Here's why. Then you shall keep the Feast of Weeks to the Lord your God with the tribute of a freewill offering from your hand, which you shall give as the Lord your God blesses you. When you got to the end of the Feast of Weeks, you had an understanding of how blessed you were going to be that season. Does that make sense? You would have seen your crops, how well they grew. You would have had an understanding of how God had blessed you. So what did God say? As you have been blessed, I want you to come back and give to me in response to your blessing. This is not tithe. This is different. This is God going, do you see what I did for you? So if you had a yield, let's say, for example, your crops just went nuts, and you had a yield, right? Then what you would do is you go, God, you just blessed me. You would come with an offering of money. Then you would say, God, I'm giving to this because what's the mental concept? I would not have this without you. It is meant for them to have this time where they bring Passover, realize I brought you out of Egypt, realize I'm your God, I took care of your people. 7 weeks later, you're going to have the Feast of Weeks, and you're going to go, wow, I can see the blessing that is coming. I'm going to give to God. And by the way, I watched this happen. Some of you, for whatever reason, inheritance or something comes, you're like, I'm going to give out of this because there's no way. And all of a sudden, and Kathy would be like, someone gave something pretty significant. And it's because, and I don't know who that person is, but I'm going, probably in my mind, going, something happened, and they just said, I'm giving because we didn't expect this, so I'm going to give it to God. Jody and I have had choices where we've been blessed, and we've just turned around and said, we didn't expect this. We're giving it to God. And in that process, what you're doing is you're responding to a God that you go, I didn't do this. Jody and I bought our house in Fremont off of Peralta. Some of you guys remember that home. Folks, we bought it. And I know that people buy homes for investments. We just bought it and said, dear God, we'd love to be able to sell it for what we got it for, right? We like even is good with us. And we were blessed. We were truly blessed. And so what happened was Heather and Jenya were back on furlough with us. And Heather was talking to Jody. She goes, they don't have loan programs in Russia, and we wanted to be able to buy a house, and we just don't know what we're going to do. And Jody goes, we'll buy it. We were at the Pancake House, and I'm like, we're buying a house? In Russia? Yep. Summer house. Woo! All right, so. But Jody just had this, she was like right there. She's like, Jeff, we've been blessed. Our house has got up in price. We'll just refinance and give it the money. I'm like, okay. Because what do? We just lived in the house and God blessed us. Folks, can I just tell you that when you do that, God goes, I will take care of you. And I can tell you that even with the selling of our house we're doing in Colorado, do I believe that God takes care of us? Yes. Why? Because he always has. And I only tell you that story to say to you, when you get into those situations, it's amazing how when you think by living in a house and your house goes up $150,000, like all of a sudden that's your money. Like you did something for it. I mean, you just live there, right? And all of a sudden you think you're owed it. And we're not. We're not. And I just think that we need to have a heart that goes and says this, that when God blesses you, turn around and give back to God. By the way, the Feast of Weeks happened late May, early June. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, and you and your son and your daughter and your male servant and your female servant and the Levite who is within your towns, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the town, the widow who are among you at the place that the Lord your God will choose to make his name dwell. Folks, another party. God liked parties, right? First thing Jesus goes to, wedding party, right? Parties. He goes, you're going to celebrate. You had family sit around, and maybe it was good for you. Maybe there's a little tension. I don't know what happened at your Thanksgiving. But the thing is, maybe it was just good to be with family and celebrate and go, you know what? God did something amazing this year. What? He took my job away. And let me trust him like I've never had before. Let me give thanks to God for that. Or God actually blessed you or gave you a raise or actually allowed you to do something that you never thought possible. Or you got grandkids. Woo! Right? Those are costly. So in that, you go, Thanksgiving, 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 more mouths to feed. Yay! But in that process, something amazing happens. Verse 12, here we go. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Are you seeing a theme? You're going to remember what? You were a slave. You had no hope. None. Nothing. And can I just say this to you? This is where we're going to get into this thing of Jesus. Folks, without Jesus, you have nothing. You have nothing. You were a slave to sin, a slave to your flesh, a slave to what the world kept putting out on the end of the carrot, a slave to what says the Joneses and what they have and what you have to do. You're a slave to all of that. You're a slave to your own selfishness, your own pride. And Jesus comes in and goes, guess what? I'm going to pull you out of that slavery. Why? Because I have power over sin. That's what he does. So over and over he goes, remember, I took you out of Egypt. Remember, I took you out of Egypt. You need to switch that in your, remember, I took you out of your sin. I saved you. And that should change your perspective. I've told you this before. I love people who come to Christ and go, dadgummit, I'm voting different now. Both ways. I've seen it happen both ways. I've seen Democrats all of a sudden vote Republican, Republicans all of a sudden vote Democrat. Why? Because they came to Jesus and went, oh, he changed my heart. God changing politics. Why? Because there's a transformation in your heart that goes, I'm not the same person I was because he pulled me out of my slavery. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and you shall be careful to observe these statutes. You shall keep the Feast of Booths. Now, the Feast of Booths was awesome. 7 days. I count Mexico for us the Feast of Booths. That's what I count Mexico. It's where you go live in a tent for a week, right? I love that. Feast of Booths was this. At the end of it, you had this big party, and you would come, but guess what? Everyone would make lean-tos out of just wood and thatched roofs and everything else, and they would live there to remember it was very quickly that you had to leave, and it was very quickly, and yet God took care of you. It was a sign that they had nothing. Now think about it. When they left Egypt, at least in Egypt, they had homes, right? Now, they weren't happy with what they had to do, but they had homes and they had a structure. And by the way, in every slavery subculture, I don't know if you guys know this, but in every slavery subculture, there is a system that takes care of it, where there really is community even in that subculture. Does that make sense? So even though there's the master, even that subculture, they find joy within that subculture because that's what we do. I was reading the book Unbroken that I told many of you guys to read about Louis Zamperini, incredible book. Every one of you should read it. But it talks about when they were in these encampment slaves, that even in those encampments, they begin this subculture where they take care of each other. Does that make sense? Where some would make sure someone was sick and they would get extra food, or they would make sure that someone got a different work detail if they knew that they were hurting in that way. Subcultures break out. So even in Egypt, they had a subculture. Now, when he took them out, they had nothing, and so they lived in these booths. And so God goes, guess what I want you to do? I want you to live in a booth. I tell this story around every Christmas. I love this story. I will tell the story till the day I die. My friend Mike Knaus. Mike Knaus was one of those guys who said about 6 words a year. I wish I was him. I truly do. I've used up all my words about 5 years ago. So the idea, I'm on extra right now. But when Mike spoke, it was always profound and deep, and you're like, oh, you know what I'm saying? Just a great guy. So what Mike did in a foreign exchange program into England. And so he was going to have to be there for Christmas. They couldn't have him fly home. And he comes back and tells a story. He goes, we're in England, and he goes, the homes are just made of pretty much just brick and everything else. And he goes, no one told me this. This was a family tradition. It was Christmas Eve. He goes, I walk in at Christmas Eve, and the house is completely cold. They had turned off the heat that morning, let it get cold. He goes, Jeff, it was cold, see your breath, frigid, cold. And he goes, so that night I walk in, and they have cleared the house. All there is a little pot with a little sterno underneath it, and they all kind of sat around this pot with blankets, and the parents said this: on the night that Jesus was born, there probably wasn't anything for Joseph to be able to grasp. And what he probably did was he went and got whatever he could. He maybe found a little pot, made a little fire, and he got some carrots, and so that's what they did. They put carrots in there, and they put a couple of onions in there. And he goes, they just told the Christmas story of what would it be like. And he goes, this house was just freezing. And he goes, I'm sure that Joseph was doing everything to make Mary comfortable. And then the birth came, and he's taking care of this baby, and he's doing everything. But how crazy it was. And he said, so we just ate this very simple meal of just vegetables with soup. And he goes, it was just crazy. He goes, we're just all cold. And they would tell the Christmas story, and the kids were just excited, and he couldn't figure out why. So he went to bed. He goes, man, I threw extra blankets, just piled them on that night. He goes, about 3 in the morning, I'm sweating to death. Because as soon as everybody went to bed, the parents turned on the heat, decorated the whole house. Then when they came downstairs, the heat was on, and it was all lit up for Christmas. And they go, this is the difference of what Jesus comes. This is what happens when Jesus comes. He goes, dude, I got Christmas that year. I got it. And he goes, you know what's amazing? How much I love the heat. Like, heat was a gift. Light was a gift, right? And all this incredible food, as good as English food can be, was a gift. So they're in these feasts of booths. Can you imagine what the booths did? It took them back to go, do you understand where we came from? Can I tell you? That's sometimes what we need to do. We need to understand where we came from. For some people, it's going back to driving around through their old neighborhood and going, man, this is where I got in trouble. This is where I did this. Look what Jesus has brought me. By the way, Feast of Booths, September and October. End of the harvest. You shall rejoice in your feast. You and your son and your daughter, your male servant, your female servant. Are you seeing a theme here? We're going to party again. The Levite, the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, and who are within your towns. For 7 days you shall keep the feast of the Lord, to your, Lord your God, and the place of the Lord you will choose, because the Lord your God will bless you in all the produce and all the work of your hands, so that you will be altogether what? Joyful. Joyful. Here's what's interesting about this, is that in this, it would be very easy. Brett's talked about this before. I've talked about this before. Very easy for them to be very happy. But notice that the reason why he made them go and have the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Weeks, Passover feast, was that he was in the midst of it all, right? They would come to Jerusalem. He was in the midst of it all. And let me tell you why that they were joyful. Man, if your harvest came in, you were happy, right? But when you know your harvest came in because God is sovereign, you are joyful. Does that make sense? Seriously, when you know that your harvest came in and God has blessed you and you're having this celebration with your family in the presence of God, then you're joyful. You are in his hand. Your God is protecting you. Your God is with you. And the purpose of these was to bring you back, bring you back, bring you back. I listened to a theologian, and I actually agree with him. He said, one of the things that's happening in the new church, and we're considered the new church, is one of the things we don't do is we don't come back and celebrate and remember enough. We don't remember enough. Because we don't realize how far we've come. We don't realize how many shoulders we're standing on, and we definitely don't realize how God has blessed us. Verse 16. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God at the place that he chooses, and the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and the feast of booths. They shall not appear before the Lord what? Empty-handed. Why? Because each one of them was a statement of God's provision. Each one of them was a statement that God was with them and was not leaving them alone. And folks, when we come to Jesus, may we come and understand that God goes, the same God who understands goes, listen, you have what you have because I gave it to you. Do be a people of provision. Verse 17. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessings of the Lord your God that he has given you. And the final thing is this, which, by the way, it says on your envelopes right now in front of you, not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. Folks, God has us all different places. God has us all in different times. This isn't a competition. It isn't like, well, he gave 5, I'll give 10. He gave 15, I'll give 20. No. Where are you at? How has God blessed you? And in that blessing and in that ability, you give. Every man should give as he is able. And in that ability, we see something. So here's what's interesting. I'm going to end with this story. You all know it. Jesus, I love this, stood and watched people give money. It's one of my favorite things I see Jesus do it. Out of the entire temple, he stands outside the money box. And I just don't know if he's obvious. I don't know if he's leaning against the wall. You know what I'm saying? But he's watching. He's going, huh. Oh. Woo. Right? He is having an emotion with everyone dropping because he can see their heart. This guy gave out of his wealth. There was really, honestly, just, this cost him nothing. And he went, oh. But it was more than anybody else had given. Does that make sense? In monetary amounts, probably more than anybody else would give him, but it cost that guy nothing. And then one woman walks up and gives what? 2 copper coins. And Jesus goes, there you go. She gave all that she had. And here's what we don't have, and I believe this with all of my heart. I cannot believe the blessing that he poured into her once she left. We don't get that story. But it's not like God went, oh, she gave all she had, go be poor and die. I don't think that's Jesus. I think he goes, oh, that's what I'm talking about. Because guess what she got? That the guy who's throwing in maybe thousands didn't get. He's all I have. He's all I have. And the guy that gave just a little bit, he goes, I got more. I'm good. I'm good. She came with 2 copper coins and dropped them in. And I love that Jesus is watching it. He goes, there you go. See that. You want to see something? See that. Because that's what all of this has been talking about. When you think that it's about you and that you have control and no, I don't give to you because I don't think you deserve and I don't, you miss it. You miss it. And so my prayer for us as we look at this, these stories of how do we deal with the poor, and the second part of how do we do these festivals is this. We come with what? Full hands. And you're going, Jeff, I don't have much. No. Read 17. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing that the Lord your God has given you. For some of you, there is no monetary. It could be time. It could be energy. It could be able. Able. But guess what you do come with? A heart that gives. Amen? God bless you in this Christmas season. Because it's coming. 1st of December. Let me say this to you, and then I'm going to wrap up our time. Very, very thankful to be in the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to be taking a break from the book of Deuteronomy for the next 4 weeks. And we'll be back at this January the 5th. What you will find out is we are going to be doing a Christmas series starting next week called Oh, the Glory of It All. And this is going to take us through the Christmas holiday and then through the new year.